Farm Small, Farm Smart Daily is part of the Modern Grower Podcast Network. Check out some of our other shows like Carrot Cash Flow, the Growing Microgreens Podcast, and Farm Small, Farm Smart. Learn more about the shows using the link below. One thing I found particularly interesting, and Dr. Rosentreter talked about this, is the surface things like lichens on the soil of these lands are really adding a big boost that most people pay no attention to. They walk over it, they don't notice, they're grazing on it, they don't notice it's there. And I know you've looked at this a lot. When you look at organisms on the soil surface, how much of an effect do they have in a system like this?
They have a big effect, and Roger Rosentreter is completely right. They do lots of interesting things. So in Australia, for example, there's a big study now looking at cyanobacteria on the soil. Most people don't see cyanobacteria. Blue-green algae is the name for cyanobacteria. And we often think of blue-green algae as being bad because it's in our water systems and it produces nitrogen and all that sort of stuff. But in the soil, it's fantastic. It's pumping out a lot of nitrogen. And what we find is that in Northern Australia, for example, where they use fire quite frequently, the traditional owners used fire to manage herbivores, to the Australian Aborigines, but pastoralists use fire to manage the vegetation, to get a nice green pick. If you burn too frequently, then you destroy the cyanobacteria. If you burn, and I can't remember the actual details, it might be a spring burn every 2 or 3 years. There's a recipe that they've been working on. Then not only do you get rid of old grass and rejuvenate the pasture, but you also encourage the cyanobacteria, and that's pumping lots of nitrogen into the soil. So in the northern part of Australia, in the summer rainfall, high rainfall landscape, cyanobacteria are critically important. You use the term brittle. It's a term that we don't use. It's a Savory term. It's the first time I saw it was when Alan Savory wrote about it. In southern Australia, in the Mediterranean landscapes, our soils are covered in a very rich crust community dominated by lichens and mosses, and also cyanobacteria and other things like diatoms and bacteria and eukaryotes and stuff. Other things like that. Excuse me. These soils are very fragile, but the crust provides a very stable surface. Think about it like the icing on the cake, or the crust on the bread. It's providing a hard surface that prevents wind and water erosion. Now, when we find crusts, we often don't find vascular plants growing. Now, is that because they're stopping vascular plants growing, or are they growing where vascular plants don't really grow that much? Our experience is that in degraded systems, these crusts come back. They're the primary colonizers. They're coming back and stabilizing the system. Eventually, you'll get grasses coming in. Grasses will overtop the crust. The crust can't compete with low levels of light. Vascular plants take up the moisture. The crust disappears. So it's just ebb and flow. And it's quite a dynamic system that when vascular plants go, crusts tend to become more dominant and vice versa. So in answer to your question, they're critically important. They're critically important all over the world. And this is one of the problems with the holistic resource management doctrine, that they say that you've got to break up that brittle crust because it's halting succession is the term that the people use. And maybe the crust is stopping infiltration. But what it's doing is it's moving water from a particular area down to another area. So it's helping to move water around in the system. They're critically important.
How much of a role does that crust play on what's happening below the surface? So that crust is alive, it's feeding microbes below the surface, which are then doing work to pave the way for future succession.
I think the crust is having a big effect. It's not really my area of work, but I know that people are looking at linkages between crusts and mycorrhizal fungi and plants, and there are some very strong linkages. And I know that beneath the crust, we get higher levels of not only nitrogen and carbon, but we get manganese and copper and different trace elements. So clearly the crust is nurturing the soil beneath it. When you lose the crust, you lose that tiny topsoil layer that has most of the carbon and most of the nitrogen, most of the trace elements. So it has to be having an important role in what's happening below the soil.
Hey there, guess what? If you're a farmer, you can have your low tunnels paid for by the NRCS. They have this cool new program where farmers can get $4 to $5 for each square foot to help with a Quick Hoops low tunnel system, frames and fabric included. It's like free money to help you grow more stuff on your farm. Want to learn more about Quick Hoops and the NRCS program? Click on the link below.